Kevin Simmers was a very proud member of the drug squad in Maryland. He delighted in throwing dealers and users in prison. Then his own teenage daughter got addicted to heroin, and he faced a heartbreaking dilemma.
Stay with us. The newsroom is next on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, it's 10 o'clock GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the news.
Prepare to turn right.
Protesters are back on the streets of Belarus to challenge the re-election of President Lukashenko. We hear about the police crackdown there.
Truly, there is no to have done anything.
Please turn right in 300 yards onto Newbury Road.
I don't know. I honestly really don't know.
Also on the newsroom, India now has the fourth highest number of coronavirus deaths in the world, overtaking Britain. We have a special report.
My son Joginder was a corona warrior. My son never cared for his own life.
Now turn right.
He was fearless. He was dedicated to his job.
Flooding is reported to have damaged a nuclear site in North Korea.
Prepare to keep right.
Water pressure woes. Donald Trump calls for more powerful showers to ensure he has perfect hair. First, our top stories.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. Protests are continuing for a fifth day in Belarus against the disputed re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko and the violent crackdown by the security forces. Human chains have been formed in the capital Minsk and other cities. So arrangements ribbons.
In cities across Belarus, women have marched dressed mainly in white and carrying flowers and balloons. They've lined up in what they call solidarity chains, demanding an end to the violence by police against protesters. 2 people have now died and many thousands are in custody. Every day their relatives gather outside the detention
Now make a U-turn.
desperate for news. Some protesters who've been released talk of being badly beaten and crushed into cells made for 2 people but containing 10 times that.
Taiwan is planning to increase its military spending by more than 10% amid growing tensions with China. Asia Pacific editor Celia Hatton.
On Monday, Chinese private planes briefly crossed the sensitive median line of the Taiwan Strait. The U.S. Health Secretary Alex Azar was in Taipei, a high-profile visit between China. Now, Taiwan is proposing a $15.4 billion hike in military spending, which will almost certainly be approved by President Tsai Ing-wen during the following day. Since the concern over the landslide,
Prepare to make a U-turn.
its military drills in Taiwan. South-ruled Island, Beijing expects to become its territory without Ukraine.
France says it will deploy 2 fighter jets and a naval frigate in the eastern Mediterranean because of tensions between Greece and Turkey. The announcement comes a day after the French president, Emmanuel Macron, called on Turkey to...
Please make a U-turn in 300 yards.
The authorities in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen say a service of container troops and frozen chicken meats imported from Brazil has tested positive for coronavirus. Wednesday,
Now make a
Chinese media
U-turn.
reported that coronavirus had been found in the eastern city of Wuhu on the packaging of frozen.
Thanks, Jason. Still got some debris on the M25 carriageway clockwise just past junction 6 at Godstone. The outside lane remains closed. The delays have built up back to the Placket Lane services now, so it's taking about 20 minutes or so to get through. And also still pretty slow anti-clockwise through Kent up towards the Dartford Tunnel, where there was a broken down lorry much earlier this morning. It has been recovered. The tunnels are both open, but the delays are back to junction 2 at Durrance. A3 Clapham High Street, very slow southbound from Clapham North to Clapham Common Tube, where the crossing at Clapham Park Road has been closed off.
Prepare to turn right.
And Greater Anglia trains are still running with delays of 10 minutes or so on services from Colchester into Liverpool Street following some earlier flooding. And if you come across any traffic issues, do let us know. You can ring in on 0800 731 2000. More after the news at 11:30. On Digital Radio
94.9.
Several days of clashes between Uber and...
Please turn right in 300 yards towards Heathrow Airport Terminals 1, 2 and 3.
Imperial College London indicates 6% of the population in England have been infected with the coronavirus by mid-July. 100
Now turn right and then turn half left.
The world's largest home testing program for COVID-19. The Lebanese parliament has approved the state of emergency declared in Beirut by the government after last week's catastrophic explosion. Some observers have questioned the need for a state of emergency, pointing to how thousands of Lebanese have organised themselves to carry out clearing up operations in the worst-hit districts. Sebastian Osher reports.
Roads to the centre have been blocked with metal gates to prevent protesters from reaching it, while security forces have been mobilised in large numbers. Activists called for the meeting to be stopped. Many Lebanese fear the state of emergency gives the army sweeping powers, which could be used to stifle free speech and the anger on the streets. There have been calls for MPs to resign en masse so that a new election can be triggered.
Now turn half left onto Newbury Road.
To put forward as the next Prime Minister. The likeliest candidate
Prepare to keep right.
to be the last but one Premier, Saad Hariri, a choice that won't calm people's rage.
A report by the US Department of Agriculture says almost 60% of North Korea's population is facing food shortages. The assessment is about 2% higher than last year. It means a further 700,000 North Koreans have less food than the minimum required for proper sustenance. BBC News.
Thanks very much. More on that damage to the nuclear facility later in the programme. You're listening to Newsroom from the BBC World Service. He's ruled the former Soviet part of Belarus for 26 years. President.
Please keep right in 3/4 of a mile and follow road M4 towards central London.
Sunday, he claimed his sixth election victory, all marred by allegations of vote rigging and faulty arithmetic. Official figures of 80% vote. As the newsroom's Richard Hamilton reports, Mr. Bush's victory has been met by waves of international condemnation. Protests
Last night, more people gathered in the capital Minsk to protest against Sunday's election results.
Now keep right and then leave the roundabout at the third exit.
Smaller than on the 3 previous nights. Nysa Durham's partner, Stas Gorlin, who's a Belarusian PhD researcher, was dragged from their home in the early hours of Wednesday morning.
Please leave the roundabout at the third exit.
Armed forces, I'm not even sure who they were. We believe them to be KGB, but they knocked on our door.
Now turn
Sort
left.
of exchange, and then my partner told me to go into the bedroom and sort of hide. Eventually, these men were in our house, and they were wearing masks, and they put a blanket over my head. All I could see was one of them had a AK-47, another one had a gun. They moved me to a different room. I couldn't tell what was happening to my partner because they made sure that I couldn't even hear anything that they were saying, really. Truly, there's no reason for them to have done anything because we weren't a part of the protest. We weren't a part of the opposition.
Prepare to keep right.
His research is not his area of expertise. So, you know, I don't know. I honestly really don't know.
President Alexander Lukashenko, who's been in power since 1994, has been called the last dictator of Europe and appears to be determined to hold on. The opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, fled the country on Tuesday night and is now in Lithuania. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has condemned the violence, demanding the release of all those who have been unlawfully detained. Anais Guerin is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Belarus.
Please keep right in 3/4 of a mile and continue to follow road M4 towards central London.
To stay in power at all costs, and he will not tolerate electoral revolution and to oust him, hence the announcement of extraordinarily high results for him, 80%, and for his re-election, and this is actually why people are in the street, because these figures do not correspond to reality.
Anais Guerin says sanctions against Belarus will only harm the wider population, which is already suffering from a dire
Now keep
economic
right.
crisis made worse
First of all, tell us about this possible damage at your yacht.
Well, what's happened is that the Kurion River, which runs alongside the nuclear facility, and they draw that's into flood, and they draw water from the river for cooling the nuclear facilities from two pump houses, and those appear to have been flooded and are probably now out of commission. It's possibly not as dangerous as it sounds. Remember the Fukushima disaster was caused by pump houses being inundated with seawater. We think that the reactors are not operating at the moment, but there is obviously a danger involved.
And is the warning about food shortages, is that related to the flooding as well?
That is indeed. Well, Korean agriculture is always on the knife edge. They can't feed their entire population, and as I said, 15 million people are suffering from food insecurity. These floods have also destroyed large areas of farmland that provide rice and other staple crops, so they are going to be needing food aid again this year, and could be heading towards yet another Korean famine.
Yeah, of course, all exacerbated by the coronavirus crisis, which is taking the corner with China shut. Any sign of the rains coming to an end?
Looked ahead at the Korean, South Korean Met Office, and looks like they're in for a satisfying for rain return next week. So it's been affecting both sides of the border, but North Korea has been hit very, very hard indeed.
Alistair, many thanks, Alistair. Despite their reputation as cold-hearted killers, it seems that sharks may be more community-minded than previously thought. A new study on shark relationships in the Pacific Ocean. The Zoological Society of London was involved in research.
This study was based on 4 years of travel data from the South Pacific Ocean. They were able to show social preferences and social bonds associated with population for up to 4 years, and that actually might serve to enhance information exchange between individuals about different barriers to food.
And how do you find this friendship shows itself?
It was actually very cryptic. What's kind of interesting about this paper is it suggests that actually sociality and marine environment is kind of a big link that might be much more consistent than we might think. So there's no reproductive functions here. Sharks aren't looking after juveniles or young mating, and they're not feeding at this location either. So actually it tends to manifest itself in just individuals following one another when it comes to being present in the same location at the same time, even though many of these individuals will move offshore at night time to feed in small groups or individually.
Yeah, and it was found that they tended to hang out in the same place on the reef, and they often gathered in the morning, as well as that.
That's right, yeah. So we find that the species at this particular location, they feed offshore generally, and they do that at night time. So it's an attracting factor is that individuals kind of arrive back to very key locations, core areas, core community sites within this very small atoll, which is only 7 kilometres wide. We found 5 distinct social communities that were spatially segregated, and they sort of arrive slowly during the course of the morning, and so the group size increases throughout the day.
But when they go off on their own rather than in pairs or bigger groups.
Well, they go off on their own or in small groups, and what we're suggesting in this study is actually that by sort of meeting in a core area during the day, that if individuals then move offshore, then others will follow to find new foraging locations as well.
And were you surprised to see this?
I was surprised to see that we were finding the same pairs of individuals that had strong social bonds in the first year of the study were still persisting with those strong social bonds in the fourth year of the study as well. I mean, that's something that
Please follow the road for 2 miles.
2 months ago, places of worship like the Tirumala complex in South India reopened. Thousands of worshippers have returned to the towering temple to receive blessings from the Hindu god Lord Venkateshwar, who's believed to keep away trouble. Before they say their socially distanced prayers, they have to pass a thermal scan. Staff must wear masks and gloves. But even with safety measures, more than 740 workers have tested positive with coronavirus. 3 have died, including a priest. Despite some concern, the temple remains open. Anil Kumar Singhal, the executive officer, defended the decision. Doing this for the sake of devotees who've been wanting to visit the temple for so long. Not for revenue, he said. As economic and social life resumes in the world's second most populous nation, markets are crammed with shoppers. Streets that were deserted months ago are now congested. All as India has yet to reach its peak of coronavirus cases. The number of deaths due to COVID-19 is rising rapidly. India has now overtaken the UK and is 4th in the world for fatalities. In a country of 1.3 billion, it's still a relatively low death rate. For every family burying a loved one, there's fresh pain.
My son Joginder was a corona warrior and will be remembered as that by us.
Rajendra Kumar Chowdhury's son, Joginder, was one of more than 200 doctors who died from the virus in India. He was just 27. In a photo we were sent, Joginder can be seen smiling at the Great Wall of China. Rajendra, a farmer, borrowed money so his son could study medicine abroad.
My son never cared for his own life while on COVID duty. He was fearless. He was dedicated to his job. We never imagined he wouldn't survive.
Other frontline staff are also facing challenges as they work to contain COVID cases in India. Last week, thousands of female health workers, known as ushers, went on strike, protesting against poor pay and lack of PPE. Kavita Singh Yadav was one of them.
Minimum sureksha साधन नहीं दिए गए, जैसे mask, gloves.
I'm scared of coming back home because we are in close contact with corona-positive patients without protection.
हमारे परिवार के और सदस्यों को संक्रमण है.
Ushers have been at the forefront of India's track and trace operation. Their grassroots work in slums and rural areas considered vital.
कोरोना के समय में
Put signs outside houses of people who test positive and help in contact tracing by going door to door and asking people about their symptoms.
50 घरों का सर्वे करना होता था.
Even with those efforts, India has a low testing rate compared with other countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently called on the worst affected states to ramp up capacity. Experts say that if India wants to flatten its upward curve, testing, as well as stricter social distancing, remains key. Ryan Wall is an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins University, based in Delhi.
So it's very difficult to say what the trajectory of the epidemic will look like here in India. There are some studies that have shown that substantial proportions of the population in some areas may have already been exposed to the virus and therefore could have some level of immunity, meaning that
Please leave the roundabout at the second exit towards Road A for central London.
Experts say the sheer size of India means the country will have many smaller peaks, and so containing the spread of COVID-19 continues to be challenging. As cases rise in
Please leave the roundabout at the second exit.
when India will be past the worst.
Our South Asia correspondent Regina Vaidyanathan. The number of civilians killed or injured in armed conflicts around the world appears to have fallen sharply during the coronavirus pandemic. Data collected by the charity Action on Armed Violence suggests a 58% reduction in casualties in the past 4 months. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale reports.
The charity Action on Armed Violence collated reports of incidents where people were killed or injured in some of the world's bloodiest and longest conflicts from between April and July this year. Comparing the data from last year, they found a sharp reduction in the number of civilians killed or injured by explosives, along with evidence of fewer airstrikes and attacks using improvised explosive devices. Reports from Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia and Pakistan all suggested a drop in violence. In Syria, the number of civilians killed or injured fell by 78%.
Now turn left.
Compared with the same 4 months last year.
While the UK is urging its population to shed the pound to better protect its health from COVID, China is ramping up measures to stop people leaving so much uneaten. This week, President Xi Jinping launched a nationwide Clean Plate campaign. Chinese people have been giving their reaction when speaking to our China media analyst, Gary.
This campaign is very much targeted at the amount of food that people are eating in restaurants. So normally what happens in China, people go to a restaurant and they'll sit on what's known as a lazy Susan, which is a big round table with a wheel, so basically you can turn the plates around on the table, and they'll order lots and lots of different dishes. But now
Prepare to keep right.
if you're sitting 10 people to a table, you must have fewer than 9 dishes. And if you're 2 or 3 people just sitting at a table together eating a meal, restaurants should be giving you smaller portions. So the idea is that people are eating a lot less. It's common in China that rather than eating one set dish, you'll order lots of little dishes. Now,
Please keep right in a quarter of a mile towards Road A4 Central London.
You're eating fewer and leaving less waste.
Yeah, and what's been the reaction to this campaign?
There's been mixed reaction to this, really. Some people don't really see a problem with it, but they're saying that it's not
now keep right.
COVID-19 era, but at the same time, China does waste a large amount of food annually. In fact, it wastes around 80 million tons, which is enough to feed 30 to 50 million people. So there have been aggressive tactics that have been necessary to reshape the way that people think about their consumption habits. And in general, China's had a growing problem with obesity. So yeah, such measures are necessary.
And are restaurants concerned about losing revenue?
Not so much so. One of the things that restaurants, lots of companies have accepted is that they need to think more responsibly. They need to be seen as more responsible in the waste that they consume, because China is a huge country and it does have this problem with waste. So a lot of cities in China have already implemented policies anyway, saying that restaurants have to divide their waste and make sure that they're recycling their food waste, otherwise they can face punishment. So they're more concerned about that than they are about losing revenue, being seen as bad citizens or bad companies because they're not properly recycling their food waste.
And will banquets held by Communist Party officials also be scaled down?
Oh, we'll have to see. They're very common in China anyway, especially at the top level, to see hundreds of people all together in a room with these massive banquets. The idea has been generally to crack down on banquets in China, but they still go ahead in many, many different areas, and particularly among officials.
Gary Allen, our China media analyst, listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Some of the other stories now with Jerry.
The Prime Minister of Mauritius says almost all of the oil on the stranded Japanese tanker has now been removed. The wind's dugouts announced more than 3,000 tons have been pumped out, with a small amount remaining on board.
Prepare to keep left.
Started to leak fuel into the Indian Ocean 2 weeks later. Researchers in the UK say screening women for breast cancer from their 40s rather than waiting until their 50s could save lives. A study of 160,000 women across Britain over 23 years old suggested 1 life per 1,000 women screened could be saved. Data research UK says many women received false positive results.
Please keep left in a quarter of a mile towards Road A4 Central London West End.
The oxygen turbulence as it was still forming and expanding. But Simona Begay from the Max Planck Institute for Astrophysics in Germany said she was surprised by what they saw.
You can think about it like a teenager and a teenager room, and you open the room and you expect to find chaos and mess everywhere. No, we opened the room and it was a very quiet, very tidy galaxy, which was really unexpected.
Mona Bagatti and her team now plan to observe other young galaxies to see if this is more common than they previously thought. And a sheriff in Florida has forbidden his deputies from wearing masks while on duty, barring exceptional circumstances. Marion County Sheriff Billy Woods has also ordered that any person who walks into one of the lobbies of the sheriff's office, including the main district offices, wearing a mask, will be asked to take it off.
Donald Trump
Now keep left.
the greatest challenges of any modern American president: economy in recession, coronavirus outbreak. But as the US copes with its biggest public health crisis in a century, he has another pressing issue on his mind. As Daniel Mann reports, the president wants to make showers more powerful to ensure he has perfect hair.
Can I miss you here?
The answer is yes, but the people in New Hampshire where I'm going to be in about an hour from now, I hope they're going to understand. Donald Trump appearing on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon when he was campaigning to become president and ready for a joke. The presenter stuck his hand in the world's most famous comb-over and left the soon-to-be Commander-in-Chief's blonde hair all Chicago. Keeping his hair in place as gusts of wind batter his head when he boards Air Force One or speaks to journalists in the open air has been a problem for Mr. Trump. He, in his words, wants his hair perfect. The solution? More power from your shower. The US Department of Energy is proposing easing regulations following complaints from President Trump. Currently, 9.5 litres per minute is permitted to a single shower fitting in order to conserve water. But the plan is to allow fixtures to include multiple shower heads and raise water pressure. Last month, Mr. Trump remarked, "Shower heads, you take a shower, the water doesn't come out. You just stand there longer when you take a shower longer. Because my hair, I don't know about you, but it has to be perfect. Perfect." Ever since last year, President Trump has been pushing for new rules on bathroom fittings, claiming that people have to flush their toilets too often. But consumer groups insist that the rules as they stand save energy. And for Mr. Trump, getting that perfect hair will be a long journey. He has to be re-elected in November, and the proposals can be challenged in the courts.
Daniel, that brings us to our main world news once again. Women have taken to the streets in Belarus to demand an end to police violence against protesters by disputed re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko. We'll have a full summary next. That's it for now from the newsroom.
This is the BBC World Service asking, what will it take
Prepare to turn
vaccinate
right.
the world against COVID-19?
As we know, there's no vaccine at the moment, but there's hope.
This hope rests largely on the shoulders of scientists to safely develop at least one vaccine for COVID-19. In this episode, you'll find out what it will take to deploy it around the world.
The delivery of vaccines will not be simultaneously to everybody everywhere.
Who gets to be first in the queue to get it? We need to start thinking about
Using a human rights framework, we don't necessarily think about the person who pays the most.
and how best to convince people to have it.
People are constantly weighing risks. What's the risk of this disease versus the risk of a brand new vaccine? One of the big anxieties about the potential COVID vaccine is too quick, can't be safe.
Vaccines, Money and Politics. Tuesday at 8 and 14 GMT. On the BBC World Service, in just a few minutes, one of them told me that she imagines she is cutting up about 36 chickens per minute. You hear a lot of cases of their wrists cramping up, their fingers cramping up. Meatpacking factories have become the source of major global coronavirus outbreaks. But why? I'm Thomasin Ford, and on the food chain this week, we explore the unique conditions that led us here. After the news.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Protests are continuing for a fifth day in Belarus against the disputed re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko and the violent crackdown by the security forces. Women carrying flowers...
Please turn right in 300 yards onto Beecham Place.
Belarus's Interior Ministry says about another 700 people were detained on Wednesday. The army in Mozambique is fighting to regain control of a key northern port, Musimwa de Praia, seized earlier this week by Islamist militants. The military is reported to have suffered heavy losses, with dozens of soldiers killed and a patrol boat sunk. Reports say the army had to retreat after it ran out of ammunition. Nearly 60 jihadis are said to have died. Taiwan is planning to increase its military spending by more than 10% amid growing tensions with China. On Wednesday, Taiwan's cabinet proposed a $15.4 billion hike in spending in January, which will almost certainly be approved by President Tsai Ing-wen's majority in Parliament.
Thanks, Jason. Looking at the M25 first of all, still slow along the Surrey stretch following a breakdown earlier at the Junction 6 interchange at Godstone.
Now turn right.
It's been cleared, but the delays are still back to the Clackett Lane services, and also the M25 in Kent. Anti-clockwise still pretty slow from Junction 2 at Dartmouth up to the Dartford River crossing due to an earlier broken down lorry in one of the tunnels. Both tunnels are open now, so you will get through.
Now
Clapham,
turn
the A3,
right
Clapham High Street,
onto Thames
southbound,
Road.
still heavy from Clapham North down towards Clapham Common and Tube, where the crossover to Clapham Park Road is still closed following an accident. Yet, and in Clapton, Upper Clapton Road partly blocked by a broken down
Prepare
vehicle
to keep
northbound
left
near Mount Pleasant Lane, and the tailbacks here are back past Clapton Station. Greater Anglia's services are running on time now from Colchester down to London's Liverpool Street following earlier flooding. And if you come across any traffic issues, do let us know. 0800 731 2000. There'll be more travel after the news at midday.
BBC Radio London. As life in London changes.
Identified at a meat packing plant in
There's been a lot of attention recently on slaughterhouses and how some have become the centre of COVID outbreaks.
More than 27,000 workers have become infected and 99 have died.
This abattoir near Orléans were contacted by health authorities after dozens of cases of COVID-19 were detected among their colleagues.
There are several kinds of places that are incredibly vulnerable to outbreaks, places like nursing homes and meat packing plants.
Meatpacking plants have become the source of major coronavirus outbreaks. Factories and abattoirs across Europe, the United States, South America, Africa and Australia have all been affected. In some cases, the pandemic has revealed the grueling conditions facing many workers in the industry.
One of them told me that she imagines she is cutting up about 36 chickens per minute. You hear a lot of cases of, their wrists cramping up, their fingers cramping up.
We take a look at the unique environment that enables the virus to thrive and hear from one country that thinks artificial intelligence could be an answer.
The slaughterhouse operator, he will go from a guy standing at a pace line making cuts to be a guy that will handle 6 or 8 robots in parallel that will carry out the same operation.
Today we ask the question, why does the meat industry have such a coronavirus problem? And could this be a wake-up call for change? As the world began grappling with the news on March the 11th that COVID-19 had officially become a pandemic, the virus was already quietly spreading through meat processing plants. Across the United States, meatpacking plants began shutting down factories after thousands of workers tested positive for the virus.
They tend to be very large facilities on a single floor.
This is James McDonald, Professor of Agricultural Economics at the University of Maryland in the US. And this is a meatpacking factory. It's here where the animals get transformed into those neatly packaged items we find on supermarket shelves. In the factory, once the animals are stunned, killed and chilled, they enter what's called the fabrication floor.
In the fabrication floor, there are many workers standing typically shoulder to shoulder with sharp knives. The carcasses are first split into halves of squares, and then they're moved along in conveyor belts and taken off onto trays next to the belts, where people are cutting them up, doing fairly repetitive activities all day and cutting out different pieces, trimming the fat off, sometimes cutting it to make boneless product. The meat then flows through in that way, being disassembled packed into boxes at the end of the line, and then the boxes are shipped onto trucks waiting at the other end of the plant, and the trucks ship off with the meat to the destinations, whether it's supermarkets or restaurants or export facilities.
So then, the big question, why are these places such breeding grounds for coronavirus?
They're breeding grounds for a lot of respiratory illnesses because the atmosphere in the buildings themselves are full of microbes coming off the animals. They're heavily air conditioned, which moves microbes around the place. In this case, the coronavirus is not coming off the animals, but if it is introduced by an infected worker, those workers again are very close to one another. They're very loud, so that when you have to talk to someone, you talk loudly. That generates a lot of spray between people. And then the workers themselves, they frequently come to work together in buses or together in cars. They're very close to one another, even as they walk into the plant or walk out or go to breaks. So it is a unique place in factory that I've seen for the number of workers standing very close to one another, and that creates risks.
James says he thinks the sheer number of workers in such close proximity in cold conditions is unique to meat processing plants. And in the US, they have some of the largest factories in the world.
Back in the 1980s, managers of plants realized that they could realize economies of your costs per animal or per pound of meat by getting a lot bigger if you could plants day after day. I think at the same time they realized that there was a way to reorganize the fabrication and killing floors on those plants to take advantage of the large flows of immigrant labor, particularly in those days from Central America. As a result, firms built much bigger in the 1990s. As a result of that, we have a relatively small number of firms, 4 big firms typically in cattle and 5 in hogs, running 25 or 30 plants that account for most production.
So, with much big factories, if there's a coronavirus outbreak, it means thousands of workers in one place are suddenly at risk. And one of the areas many immigrants are...
We're one of the top 5 states for many of the main food crops. There was a time, up until very recently, that we had more hogs than people in our state.
This is Victoria Bulubasis, a journalist and filmmaker. She's been reporting on immigrant communities in North Carolina for the last decade.
So folks get here because they hear of work, agricultural work, they're picking tobacco.
Please keep left in 300 yards onto Knightsbridge.
To process our pigs.
And the work is tough.
Well, I know particularly in the poultry plants that it is very grueling work. One of them told me that she imagines she is cutting up about 36 chickens per minute. And that was verified when I spoke to a spokesperson of that plant who told me how many that they process a week. It's very quick. You hear a lot of cases of, their wrists cramping up, their fingers cramping up.
North Carolina now has one of the highest number of coronavirus outbreaks at meat processing plants in the country. That's according to a non-profit news organisation called the Food and Environment Reporting Network. Victoria says many workers are undocumented. They're too scared to speak out. And if they
now
do,
keep
they
left.
don't want to reveal their names.
I am being told that they are receiving limited information in Spanish.
Please go straight on in 300 yards onto Hyde Park Corner.
To work, so they're not always given individual communications. I'm also told that some supervisors speak Spanish, but a lot of the workers speak Creole, they speak Burmese languages and languages in Africa. There's also many indigenous languages. I've spoken to a lot of Latinx immigrants who learn Spanish in the fields here on the job. So the communication, I think, has been an issue from the start, but there's not like an active way to inform. And everyone that I've spoke to, as far as workers, are confused as to what they're supposed to do if they get sick.
And is there transparency at the plants? For example, if there's an outbreak, are people informed straight away? Do they know of the numbers? Do they know where the outbreaks are happening?
Workers are telling me they're not informed straight away. They are telling me that they are noticing sort of like a drop in colleagues. So they walk into work and see that someone hasn't shown up, and then 2 people haven't shown up, and then 6 the next week. And they're not always told why. Many have complained because they'll find out through the grapevine that someone they worked next to the week before is positive. This state will not reveal the names of the plants with outbreaks. So they will give us the number of plants that have had outbreaks, but they won't reveal the names of them. And that has been a huge issue.
Now go straight on and then keep right.
General situation when it comes to sick pay. Are people still being paid when they have to self-isolate?
I've heard varying reports.
Now keep right and then turn into the second street on the left.
For example, had a positive test, and this woman was hired to work as a housekeeper in a poultry plant. Her husband, whom she lives with, tested positive, and she wasn't able to isolate and was having symptoms. So rather than go and get tested, which has also been an issue here in the States, there aren't that many tests, or there haven't been. She told her boss, and they required a positive test, and she wasn't able to get one, and so they fired her. I've heard of other people say, "Oh, I was promised."
Now turn left onto Grosvenor Place.
I was promised to get, that 10 days pay, and I got 4. Where there's always a discrepancy in what the company says, "Oh, that never happened," but they don't speak to specific cases. So
prepare to turn left.
Clear, and each company has their own reasons. I think it also depends on if they're a contract worker or work directly with the company.
Would you go so far as saying that the meatpacking coronavirus problem is a racist one?
Definitely. I think, it's systemically in our health system.
Please turn left in 300 yards onto Buckingham Palace Road.
That is systemic racism for various reasons. And I think you can see that, every day in action at these places where workers are not treated well and not given the proper protection they needed, and they're not even given the decency of information. And they're not dignified with, the ability to be safe and stay home from work and still get paid.
We contacted the North American Meat Institute for a response. That's the trade association that represents the majority of meat processing in the United States, but they didn't reply. Professor James McDonald says he has seen some positive changes in the way US factories are working.
I think companies are going to continue moving in a direction that they
now turn left.
They change some of the product mix. They're shipping more carcasses, half carcasses, and doing less cutting up and boneless production. That shifts some workers out of.
Please turn right in 300 yards onto Buckingham
They're
Gate.
investing in gloves, personal protective gear, and testing. All of those things are things that the companies have been able to do that I think has allowed them to mostly get back to full production and control it in that sense, although it's clear that a lot of workers are still getting sick. Those are things you can do within 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Over the longer term, they would really have to think about a significant investment in redesigning the plants. And that'll take several years.
Victoria says
now turn right.
She's speaking to, though, are still feeling vulnerable.
Well, obviously they're calling for basic protections, enhanced protections, really, considering the pandemic. They're calling for fair wages, living wages, paid time off. But I think, there's a lot of fear in speaking up and having an employer retaliate, and then there's a lot of fear if you're undocumented to sort of be that whistleblower. So most people that spoke to me did not use their real names. But when I'm out there with them and when I'm driving through their towns, and I hear in their stories that they want to be seen in a way that they're not just viewed as faceless workers and labeled as such, but their communities, their mothers coming home, possibly bringing a sickness to their families. I visited a family last week and went into their home. And the father works at the meatpacking plant, and his teenage daughter, the parents isolate from her in the house, and they wear masks if they're watching TV together. They don't go near each other without a mask, and they sit on opposite ends of the dinner table while they're eating. And they were taking such precautions, and it's because they are, families, and they have whole communities that they want to see again, and they have their own lives and churches and places to go that they want to be able to go again. And so I think maybe a lot of these communities have felt and been invisibilized, but they are not invisible. They're here.
You're listening to The Food Chain from the BBC World.
Please turn left in 200 yards onto Victoria Street.
Some of the reasons why coronavirus is rife in meatpacking factories. The cold environment, the number of people working so closely together, and in some cases, the poor working conditions. But what's the solution? In the US, even with temperature checks, PPE and plexiglass, outbreaks are still...
Now turn left.
Some of the things that are done manually, some places in the world, or other places in the world, are done by robots in Denmark. So the number of robots in there, or the technology...
Prepare to keep right.
Big difference.
This is Lars Henriksen, head of the Danish Meat Research Institute. They've been working on automating the industry for the last 70 years. This is the sound of a piece of kit called the automatic middle splitter. According to Lars, it radicalised the country's pork processing 20 years ago. In simple terms, it's a machine that divides the pig carcass in two, removes the backbone, that's the piercing sound you can hear now, then takes out some of the smaller bones. For every splitter installed, up to 20 fewer humans are needed. Lars says this type of automation has played a part in keeping coronavirus infections in Danish factories low.
What will make a difference, of course, is that you will have fewer people at the facility. So fewer people means less risk of contamination. So that could be an impact there.
And the next generation of robots is even more advanced, using artificial intelligence and complex sensors to learn from the humans operating them. It means they get cleverer over time.
The robot will know.
Please keep right in 300 yards onto Parliament Square.
Where is the right place to start? It will accommodate the biological variation of the cod and the unit operation. So it's the learning part that is important here. Another example where it makes more sense to use artificial intelligence is, now this becomes maybe a little meat technical, but removing the ribs from a carcass. I would recommend, if you have never been in a slaughterhouse, go see one and see what's going on, because it's a fantastic piece of work that's been done in there by skilled people. And removing the ribs of a pig carcass, that's really hard work. You have some specialized tools to do it today, and it's tough work, and it's also a piece of work where you have risk of contamination with foreign objects, and you have problems with yield and the visual appearance of the product so far. So that's a very, you can say, tedious operation to automate. There it would make a lot of sense to add artificial intelligence to improve this unit operation based on what it's doing, removing the ribs. And this particular process is on its way to Danish slaughterhouses as we speak, for testing runs shortly. As we speak, for testing runs shortly.
And then, so why is that so much more precise than humans?
Up to a certain speed, people may be as good if they have the time, but at a full-scale modern slaughterhouse, it's really fast. And then the robot will be more consistent. I think, to make it very, very simple, a robot will not get tired.
Are there differences between animals? Is it, say, easier to automate the process for pigs than for chickens or for beef?
Yes, you could say the larger the animal, the more difficult it is. So a fish factory, for instance, is very automated, or can be very automated. A poultry factory also will be, or can be, quite automated. Pork is a little more difficult, larger animals, and beef, more difficult. And I would say that the development stage in the beef industry, when you speak of automation, is not at the level where the pork industry is, if you think of what you can buy off the shelf today.
Looking to the future then, are we going to see factories without any humans at all?
No, I don't think so.
Now keep right and then turn into the second street on the left.
What I think much more is becoming important is that the good people working at the slaughterhouses, we need their skills, we need them to improve all the time, and we need we need people that understands the processes and that can build the product, and the robots becoming better all the time. So you can say that the slaughterhouse operator, he will go from a guy standing at a pace line making cuts to be a guy that will handle, let's say, 6 or 8 robots in parallel that will carry out the same operation. Completely different job, much more knowledge intensive. But what's important is that he really is a specialist in terms of what's going on the product side.
Denmark's history of automation was driven by the need to stay competitive. It has never
Now turn left onto Victoria Embankment.
Around the world, it simply had no choice.
The one important thing to understand behind this is that we have been forced to do so for many years because the salary level in Denmark is quite high compared to just the UK or to Germany or countries close to us. So in order to stay competitive on the global markets, we had to find other ways to, you could say, to bring down the cost of production. And part of that has been investing heavily in automation and technology.
But highly advanced automated meat processing factories come at a cost.
It's very expensive. Let me make that very clear. I would say the Danish Meat Research Institute, I think half of our budget goes to automation and technology development. And that's, it's every year. We've been around here for almost 70 years. So, it's a lot of money that's being channeled into automating the meat processes.
It begs the question, why would other countries go down the automation route when they have access to cheap labour?
That's actually the core of some of the problems we see. You see North America, especially US, the big meat plants there, where there's access to very low-cost labour. I believe much of it in conditions you would not accept in Northern Europe at least. You could argue that why automate? Because you don't have this cost pressure as we have. But automation will come with other advantages, also the quality, the capacity, the consistency, and all these kind of things. But also the simple fact that you will get better jobs, more knowledge-intensive jobs. You will be able to completely change the way you produce your meat. But I think it's essentially a matter of will. You have to have the will to do it. You have to be able to raise the funding, and that's the meat companies that will have to do that. And also, I think a very important thing is the ability to collaborate across the industry. This is not a single company, a job to be done. It's a big thing.
So, what does Professor James MacDonald from Maryland University think about automating America's meat industry?
Certainly several of the major U.S. firms have been investing in that type of equipment and running pilot programs. I would just say that they have not found it, for the most part, that they have found equipment yet for most of their tasks on the fabrication line that can replace their humans. So as a result, humans are still better at locating where that knife should go and how to cut with a minimal loss of meat off the bone as one does that cutting. There are continuing investments in capital equipment that would allow you to be less labor intensive. If we're able to do that, that would certainly help in controlling future risks from coronavirus or other respiratory outbreaks.
Despite this, James does agree that automation in US factories is the future.
Oh, I think they're actually going to have to. It is clear that real wages for meatpacking workers have been rising, that flows of immigrant labor into the U.S., even before the Trump administration, had been declining, And as a result, any meatpacking plant that takes a long view, looking at 5, 10, 15 years into the future, probably needs to think seriously about redesigning their plants.
The other link in the meat industry is, of course, us, the consumer. If big firms and governments aren't making fundamental changes now, can we, as consumers? For journalist Victoria, it plays on her mind.
I think about it a lot when I walk into the grocery store and I see these shrink-wrapped chicken breasts. I think back to that woman who used the name Anna to tell me she cuts bones off of 36 chickens per minute, and then you walk into the grocery store and you see them lined up all neat in the styrofoam packages. Of course, I can't help but think of her and other people.
What about just eating less meat? Professor James McDonald.
I think it is a big ask as consumers to think seriously or to be informed enough about production processes. That is, to understand what's going on in the plant, or understand what's going on with workers in the plant.
Well, why is that such a big ask? We are talking about a global pandemic where millions of people are being diagnosed with this virus, not being able to work, to feed their families.
I think it's probably a fair response on the part of many people. Maybe this is something, on the one hand, the government and public health departments should be doing, that they're not doing currently. And for a significant part of the population, they don't really see it happening to them. And so you're unlikely to get them to change their behavior on that account.
How often do you eat meat a week?
Probably 4 to 5 times a week.
And have these outbreaks made you think differently about the meat that you're consuming?
No, I wouldn't say it has. I don't particularly, I don't really base my own personal consumption decisions on what I think may be happening further up the supply chain.
And what about Lars from Denmark? Could eating less meat be a solution?
Prepare to go straight
That's
on.
another topic, isn't it?
That's all for this week. Do let us know what you think about the show. You can email the food chain at bbc.co.uk or get in touch with me on Twitter at Tamasin_Ford. We're also available as a podcast with more than 200 episodes to download. Search for BBC Food Chain wherever you get your podcasts. From me and the rest of the team, Sarah Stollartz and Simon Tulip, thanks for listening and join us again next week.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week. What goes into creating a golf course? Have you ever thought about who plans those fairways, bunkers, and annoyingly placed trees that get in the way of shots? Golf course designer David McClay Kidd is going to be revealing all sorts of secrets behind his craft. In the studio at bbcworldservice.com/in-the-studio. And in an hour, the newsroom with Oliver Conway.
An eyewitness tells us how police in Belarus are dragging people from their homes as they try to end protests. The rising COVID caseload in India. Hair wash woes why Donald Trump wants more powerful showers. And the Clean Plate campaign led by China's president.
iClue is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Kevin Simmers joined the police force in Maryland in order to fight drugs, and he made sure his daughter Brooke knew just how bad they were.
By age 10, she could identify heroin, she could identify crack cocaine, she could identify marijuana. She was, dead set against it. She was well aware of the danger of drugs.
But Kevin would have to rethink everything he thought he knew about drugs. Brooke became addicted to painkillers first, and then, age 17, broke the news to her father that she was hooked on heroin.
I cried, and I told her I loved her and that, I was there to support her and we would try to beat this problem together.
Did you want to beat it?
Yes, very much so. She asked me if I could get her into a treatment program, and I told her that I would.
On Outlook, In a few minutes' time, how Kevin turned his life around to try to help his daughter and other young women caught up in America's opioid crisis. First the news.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. Protests are continuing for a fifth day in Belarus against the disputed re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko and the violent crackdown by the security forces. Human chains have been formed in the capital Minsk and other cities. Sarah Rainsford reports.
In cities across Belarus, women have marched dressed mainly in white and carrying flowers and balloons. They've lined up in what they call solidarity chains, demanding an end to the violence by police against protesters. 2 people have now died and many thousands are in custody. Every day their relatives gather outside detention centres, desperate for news. Some protesters who've been released talk of being badly beaten and crushed into cells made for 2 people but containing 10 times that.
The army in Mozambique is fighting to regain control of a key northern port, Musimwa de Praia, seized earlier this week by Islamist militants. Our Africa correspondent Andrew Harding reports.
Multiple reports suggest that government troops were forced to make a humiliating retreat from the strategic port, having run out of ammunition. Dozens of soldiers are reported to have been killed and a patrol boat sunk. In recent months, the rebels have briefly overrun several towns in the region, in part, it seems, for propaganda and recruitment purposes. Some of the world's biggest energy companies are now seeking extra protection.
Please go straight on in 300 yards onto Blackfriars Underpass.
The government has sought some help from foreign security contractors, but so far it appears reluctant to reach out to neighbouring countries for direct military assistance.
Taiwan is planning to increase its military spending.
Thanks, Jason. Looking at the Underground, first of all, Liverpool Street Underground station has been closed due to a fire alert. So the tubes are not stopping there, but the station remains open to the Overground and TfL rail services. Roadworks on the A2 along the Kidbrooke stretch causing northbound queues back towards Eltham Station and also delaying Kidbrooke Park Road coming up from Eltham Hill. In Clapham, the A3 Clapham High Street still very slow southbound from Clapham North down to Clapham Common Tube, where the crossover to Clapham Park Road has been closed off following an accident yesterday. And on the motorways, the M25 still a bit slow clockwise through junction 6 at Godstone following an earlier breakdown, with delays back to the Clackett Lane services. The M40, if you're heading out of town, slow northbound towards junction 3 at Loudwater following a car fire. If you come across any traffic issues, do let us know on 0800 731 2000, and there'll be more travel after the news at 12:30.
On digital radio.
Now go straight on.
Grant sweeping powers to the army, which could be used to curtail free speech and stifle the anger on the streets against the political elite. News from the BBC. France says it will deploy 2 fighter jets and a naval frigate in the eastern Mediterranean because of tensions between Greece and Turkey. The announcement comes a day after the French President Emmanuel Macron called on Turkey to halt oil and gas exploration in disputed waters in the area. Mr. Macron told the Greek Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, that France would increase its military presence to monitor the situation. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the only solution was dialogue. A curfew has been imposed in Sudan's main seaport, Port Sudan, following ethnic fighting, which left more than 30 people dead. About 100 people were wounded, including members of the security forces. There have been several days of clashes between the Nuba and Beni Amran tribes, which have a long history of violence. The 2 groups signed a peace deal last September after fierce fighting. Authorities in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen say a service of people taken from some frozen chicken meat imported from Brazil was tested positive for coronavirus. On Wednesday, Chinese state media reported that coronavirus had been found in the eastern city of Wuhu on the packaging of frozen shrimps imported from Ecuador. Here's Robin Brandt.
The virus traces were found on chicken wings in the southern city of Shenzhen. Authorities there and elsewhere have been carrying out routine screening on imports of meat and seafood since June, after an outbreak in Beijing was linked to a seafood market. Tests on people and other products which may have come into contact with the Shenzhen batch will come back negative, according to local officials.
Findings published by
extraordinary journey. He was a teenager in the 1980s when President Ronald Reagan launched his Just Say No anti-drugs campaign and inspired Kevin to join the war on drugs, first in the military, training sniffer dogs, then as a police officer in the city of Hagerstown in Maryland. He was on a narcotics task force for 10 years and was very happy there because he really thought he was making a difference. That was before life got complicated.
I thoroughly believe that we can arrest our way out of this problem. Everybody who's using, everybody who's stealing, arrest everybody. I mean, I looked at it kind of like a game where my goal was to make as many arrests as I could possibly make in a month's time, and go on to the next month and see if I could beat the month before.
So this was a game that you had to win?
Yeah, I felt like that, you know, if I'm going to be an outstanding police officer and I'm going to be the best, then I need to make the most arrests.
You had a family, didn't you? A couple of children?
Yes, ma'am.
And what would you say to them about things?
My son was born in 92 and my daughter Brooke was born in 95. I mean, a lot of times I would go out and speak to different groups. I'd speak to high school groups and things like that against the problems with narcotics. I'd speak to different shelters and churches, and I'd take my kids with me. And my daughter was well aware of the dangers of narcotics. By age 10, she could identify heroin, she could identify crack cocaine, she could identify marijuana. She was, you know, dead set against it. She was well aware of the dangers of drugs.
Wow, and this was from things you told her, was it?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Brooke was born in 1995, and all through her elementary school years and middle school years, she was an exceptional athlete, very outgoing, huge personality, loud, funny. One time when she was like in 7th grade, she said she wanted to be a clown. So I bought her a unicycle, and I brought the unicycle home, and within an hour, she was able to ride the unicycle the length of my driveway. Then when she got towards the beginning of her high school years, that's when she started to become withdrawn. And it was a different set of friends. She quit playing sports. She got more oppositional, more defiant. And through high school years, I could see things coming, like I'd find cigarettes in her book bag, and then we would find that she was drinking alcohol. And then later in high school, we found that she was using marijuana. Anytime you have somebody that's in the
Prepare to turn right.
Starting to use cigarettes, starting to use alcohol, starting to use marijuana. You know, as a police officer, I knew that the end was not going to be a good sight. I mean, I knew that those things were going to lead to more destruction in her life.
What sort of age is 9th grade, 10th grade?
We're talking about 15 years old.
So, would you talk to her about it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But at this time, when she got to high school, she was more defiant. She was very anti-police. She really didn't like the fact that her dad was a police officer with a narcotics officer.
So when Brooke decided that she didn't like police officers, what kind of problems did that cause in your relationship with her?
You can imagine what it's like. You know, here I am, a police officer, and she's oppositional, and she's the problem in school, and I'm getting calls from teachers and so forth. So yes, there was a lot of problems between her and I during this time.
How did she come to be taking painkillers?
So what happened was, by her senior year of high school, after school, which would have been like 2013, 17 years old at the time, she was anxious to move out of the house right away, as soon as she possibly could. So she moved out, moved in with some friends, and she got a job. And she was out for about 2 months, 3 months, and she called me and she told me she had to meet me, that it was an emergency. And I wasn't sure what she wanted to meet and discuss, and I thought maybe she was pregnant. We went and met, and she told me that she's been doing something really stupid. She was really sorry, but she wanted to know if I'd help her. And I asked her what the problem was.
Please turn right in 300 yards onto Tower Hill.
And she said she couldn't stop taking them. She was taking them every morning. She was addicted to them, and she couldn't make it through the day without them.
Did she say how she started taking them?
She started taking them at a party. She got them illegally, and she started taking them, and she said she loved them. But then it got out of hand where she had to have them.
What was your emotional reaction to hearing that?
Well, as a police officer, I was devastated. But as a father, you know, I felt like my heart had just been cut out of it, because I knew that Percocets were very, very serious, and opiate addiction is very, very serious. And unless it's caught early, recovery rate is not high. So I wanted to find inpatient drug treatment as soon as possible. But the problem was
now turn right.
Companies wouldn't allow that to take place because they felt like she wasn't far enough along in her addiction. The addiction problem wasn't serious enough. So she started with the outpatient drug treatment program, which I was not a fan of and not in support of, but I had no choice.
So what did that involve as an outpatient?
That involved going to classes every night of the week for 1 hour.
What, and you just talk about your addiction?
Correct. Talk about the problems, the triggers that you have, things that are making you use, steps you can take to avoid those situations.
Was that having an effect on her?
Well, for about 2 weeks she was going. Now, whether or not she was still using during the 2 weeks, I don't know. But then after 2 weeks she quit. She said it wasn't a problem anymore and she wasn't going to be using any in the future. And she had this problem under control, which, as a dad, I wanted to believe her. As a police officer, there was no way in the world I knew that was true.
When did you find out that the situation had got a lot worse?
So what happened was during the fall of 2013, she quit working and she went back living with, a group of people who I didn't care for. So right around Christmas of 2013, that's when she came to me and I said, looks like things are getting a little bit out of control. And Brooke was always very honest. And she says, Dad, she says, it's much worse than a pill problem. She says, I'm shooting up with heroin every morning.
She told you that?
Yes. I cried. And I told her I loved her and that, I was there to support her and we would try to beat this problem together.
Did you want to beat it?
Yes, very much so. She asked me if I could get her into a treatment program and I told her that I would. And I got her the numbers and she made the call and they gave her 1 week wait and then she had to check in between 9 and noon. But during that week, Brooke was in active addiction. She had disappeared. I was unable to contact her. So, I'm looking everywhere for the Wednesday night before where to check into the drug treatment program. Couldn't find her. Searched all hours of the night. The next morning, I'm waiting at the house for her to show up. She shows up at her house like 9:30 in the morning. She's obviously unkempt. Her hair's not been combed.